Top Boy has always been a solid crime drama, depicting life on the streets of London's criminal underbelly through a raw and authentic lens. When the show dropped on Channel 4 all those years back, the two four-episode series fell largely under the radar. Netflix then snapped up the rights to Top Boy, but instead of a third season, rebranded the whole show into Top Boy, Summer House and Top Boy, with Summer House serving as a prequel to Netflix's soft reboot continuation of the show that preceded it. With a bigger budget and aspirations, Top Boy successfully captured what made its predecessors so enthralling, while simultaneously adding enough originality and excitement to justify its reboot. It's been 3 years since Top Boy released on Netflix, and now the second season, or fourth, depending on how you look at it, takes the same ideas and expands that out for a widespread 8-episode romp. All the familiar characters make a return, while the story serves as both a slice-of-life snapshot to how these youth seek through life, while simultaneously centering on Duchesne and his operations expansion, which serves as the stable pillar to which everything else gravitates around. This season picks up with Jamie released from prison, while Duchesne expands his empire, casting his sights to Morocco and Spain for lucrative shipments coming in. When a man named Juan makes a move on Duchesne's newly acquired turf and the feds start to intercept drops, Duchesne sends Jamie out to try and sort this out. Only, Jamie finds his loyalty wavering. This storyline is the predominant arc, but there are several other subplots that revolve around that, including a redevelopment plan for Summer House. With the very real threat of the residents being displaced, Amma finds herself on the verge of being deported. Only, a family tragedy hits even harder for her. Meanwhile, Shelley continues to work at her nail salon, but finds a face from her past sniffing around, looking for trouble. Speaking of which, Lauren finds herself in trouble thanks to controlling boyfriend Curtis. Lauren's sister Jack serves a little better, and she has a big role to play this year, serving as Duchesne's right-hand woman. Finally, there's Sully, who remains off the grid for most of the first half until he's thrown unwittingly into the thick of action and back to the forefront of the action. There are other subplots here too, but largely the season focuses on each of these plots, with an organic feel to jumping across to each of these storylines. The word authentic is thrown around a lot, but anyone who has been in the drug trade will know that some of these scenes are pretty accurate. Maybe not the shootouts, but from personal experience in the past, some of the dealings outside, and the very real threat of police suddenly showing up and searching you, is something that many youths have to deal with. The one problem with this season though comes from how the police are handled. There are detectives here, but the police work is largely an afterthought, and only really shows up when the script calls for it. That's a shame because for the most part, Top Boy does a great job with its characters, especially Jamie, who gets a lot of character growth and development across the 8 episodes. Much like seasons past, there's a consistent effort to try and keep things tight and compact, with close-up shots and handheld cameras used a lot throughout the season. This is probably one of the biggest grips I had with some of the material in Season 1, and it's great to see that addressed here, especially given how Summer House was filmed all those years ago. With great acting, a tight organic script and some shocking twists and turns, Top Boy solidifies itself as a worthy crime drama. After the final episode, you'll be crying out for Netflix to renew this one for Season 3. And you know what? This show absolutely deserves. Episode 1 of Top Boy Season 2 starts in Spain with a man named Emilio tying down Javi in a net and a silver chain. He shoots the man in the head, sending his body tumbling into the water and to the depths of the sea below. Meanwhile, Jamie is found not guilty in court. He breathes a deep sigh of relief as he's eventually free to go. Naturally, he returns home where all the gang are there to greet him, including Kit, Tyrone, and Farah. However, they're not alone for long as Duchesne extends out a peace offering through Romy, Jack and the boys, and an invitation to meet at 10 a.m. To keep things civil, Jamie accepts the gift from Jack and heads back inside to see Steph. That night, Jack and the others are stopped by police who intend to search their car. When they give the officers some lip, they're forced out the car, but everything is legit. There's nothing untoward going on here, with the vehicle registered under Reuben Miller's name. He's the one in charge of Prestige Hire cars. Eventually Jack and the gang get back in their vehicle, the police leave, as the night's events are left to stew in the air. Shelley shows up to see Duchesne at his new apartment. Duchesne is determined to try and make a go of it and become a proper family. He has a plan, wanting to step back on the road and go completely legit. That way he doesn't have to look over his shoulder anymore or get mixed up in criminal affairs. Things are getting hairy over in Spain though, and Emilio rings Lizzie while she's out having dinner with Jeffrey. He's out, not wanting to do business anymore, bringing Lizzie out to Spain to see him personally. Emilio admits that his wife, Sofia, is ill. With 6 months at best left alive, he's decided to skip out to be there for her. The thing is, the Moroccan shipment is bigger than all of them, and Lizzie pleads with Emilio to help. Without him serving as ringleader, everything could go sour very quickly. Emilio reassures Lizzie though that as long as they keep paying Juan El Bueno, then things should be okay. Tensions between Steph and Jamie are still high, with Jamie trying to catch up for lost time and play the father figure. The thing is, he's been gone for a while, and Steph is a lot older than he was before. After dropping Steph off at school, Jamie heads out to meet Duchesne, who gets the lowdown from Jack on the night's events. Duchesne immediately tells Jamie he's got a link in Spain and Morocco, and the promise of more money than they could dream of. Duchesne wants Jamie working just like before. It would still be under Duchesne's direction and name, but the allure of money is enough for Jamie to agree and decide to jump aboard. As anyone who makes a lot of money will tell you, massive profits can result in massive amounts of tax, national insurance and business costs. Alas, Duchesne finds this out the hard way when he goes over his finances with Jeffrey. However, he has another idea. The summer house redevelopment is coming up, and if Duchesne was to get involved in this $1.4 billion project, it could help Duchesne funnel 6 or 7 million of his turnover, which is considerably more than the projected 3 million. Despite Summerhouse being a complete mess, it's still home to a lot of his people. This is where Duchesne started, of course, and knocking it down, even if it's for a redevelopment program, feels like the end of an era. The residents are obviously unhappy when they find out, especially as they're receiving eviction notices. Each of the residents have been displaced across England, from Croydon across to Luton. They're fired up and unwilling to move. While all this is going on, Atticus has gone missing. Amma, his mum, dips in and out of the episode, popping up at different areas around Summerhouse trying to find her son. Over in Spain, Lizzie visits Juan, but there's a problem. The meeting goes completely awry as their contact, Antonio, is gunned down. Lizzie hurriedly rings Duchesne to let him know, as everything starts to fall apart. As the episode closes out, Steph rings Atticus's phone, but as it rings, he's found in the skip, lying in a pool of his own blood. Top Boy is back, and the first episode wastes absolutely no time getting right to the heart of the drama here. You've got Duchesne still organizing traffic and making sure his business stays afloat, making as much money as possible. He's still working with Jack and the others, but relations in Spain have gone sour in a big way. Juan has clearly seen an opportunity to cut Emilio out of his business, and in doing so, it has completely turned the business upside down. What does this mean for our characters now? It's certainly not looking good for Duchesne, but with Jamie working by his side and Sully on the sidelines for now, this looks to be an intriguing season going forward. Episode 2 of Top Boy Season 2 begins with news of At's death spreading across Summerhouse. Jack sits by the beach, writing out a note that reads "I'm sorry," while police arrive and question the residents about what they may know. Of course, the police aren't exactly favorable around here, but Kieran has big news, which he shares with Jack. He's found footage of Ats being grabbed by an unknown female and a couple of other men late at night, who bundle him into their car. Jack distributes the picture across to the others. Amma has more problems to contend with beyond Atticus' death though. She's received a letter from immigration confirming she's being deported. Duchesne arrives in Spain where he touches down and learns the shooting was payback. Juan has switched sides and is now working with their competitors. Duchesne wants to throw money as this, but Juan doesn't work that way. That's something Emilio is quick to point out, but in order to come up with a solution, Duchesne wants to talk to them. Emilio does eventually manage to set up a meet, with Duchesne bound for La Linière to meet a man called Mauner. He forces Lizzie to go home, pointing out he doesn't need her anymore. Thankfully, the man Duchesne is meeting does speak English and they talk about the situation. Duchesne is not happy and realizes Mauner is playing for time. Eventually, he convinces Mauner to bring his boss in, although he's quick to point out he's not going to like this. As they drive together, they stop in the middle of nowhere, where two muscly men step in the car, bag Duchesne, and point a gun to his head. Eventually, Duchesne is brought to an estate and forced down on his knees. He meets Mauner's boss, who promises that he's going to sort it all out, but they need some time to move this big shipment. In Summerhouse, Jack gathers the troops and starts trying to find the girl. They believe she looks about 15 or so, which would mean she's still in school. After throwing shade at Jamie, Jack receives a tip-off that she's been seen in the shopping center. When they get there though, they chase after her, but it's not the right girl. After a tough night, Jack meets Bex in an underground bar. However, a teary Lauren phones asking for help, claiming Curtis's trouble. Jack hangs up, but as she heads outside with Bex, the pair are confronted by a group of boys who call them out for being lesbians and beat them down, stealing their bags. So Top Boy Season 2 is now operating on two fronts, one in Spain and the other in London. With drugs being shipped out and Duchesne right in the heart of this whole dilemma, there's both a murder mystery element to this, At's death, and more of an overarching crime thriller vibe too. The ensuing result is a season that feels a bit more expansive than the first, although characters like Sully have felt wasted so far and haven't had a whole lot to do. I'd imagine we'll see more of Lauren and Curtis this year, while Jamie's part to play in all this, working for Duchesne in Spain, is going to have a larger role in the conflict ahead. Either way though, Top Boy is just starting to slip into a consistent rhythm. Episode 3 of Top Boy Season 2 begins with the drug shipment being brought up on shore. Unfortunately, police intercept the deal and find the early stash. With Mauner watching on from afar, he hurriedly heads back to let Duchesne know what's happened. If feds were there waiting for them, Duchesne realizes they have a rat in their operation. With big problems in Spain, Duchesne tasks Jack with heading out and seeing Sully. He needs someone to go out to Spain and try and sort this out. At the same time, he also tasks Jack with resolving At's murder. There's a lot on her plate, but after passing on Duchesne's message, he eventually meets his old pal in the diner. There's a lot of bad blood between Duchesne and Sully, stemming way back to the earlier seasons. Eventually Sully pounces on Duchesne, but Kieran and the others are quick to break it up. That's an emphatic no from Sully in terms of getting involved. Instead, Duchesne turns to Jamie, who doesn't have much of a choice but to leave in the morning. With Jamie out the country, Duchesne tasks Jack with branching out and looking after Jamie's crew. Jack meets Lauren, who's heavily pregnant and stuck in a controlling relationship. Curtis demands she return in the next 30 minutes after constantly ringing her, but Lauren pleads with Jack for help in getting out of this situation. Jack promises to help soon, but things don't look good. With the Summerhouse redevelopment starting to take shape, Shelley meets up with some of the residents who try to come up with a report to fight back against Summerhouse being knocked down. Pat wants to use her savings, but Shelley suggests speaking to her son. Despite rejecting the offer, Shelley heads off herself and speaks to Duchesne, asking for some funds to work on fighting back against the development. The irony here is that Duchesne is the one investing, and he eventually reveals that to her. Shelley is shocked. When Sully heads back to his barge, Pebbles is there to see him. She's in a lot of trouble, unable to go home, as people are after her following her partner, Rashon, taking the drugs for himself. Sully shows up to see Rashon and warns that this could get bad very fast. Although he plays dumb, Sully decides to come back later on at night and send a proper message. It doesn't take long for him to hand over the drugs, although his version of events claims that it was Pebbles who goaded him into taking them in the first place. Lizzie is back in London and approaches Jamie before he heads out to see the suppliers. She comes up with an alternate coup, something that would see the pair make millions by cutting Duchesne out of the deal. Given Juan is the key here, she believes they can go into business together, likening it to a second chance for them. Jack tracks down the boy who mugged her and Bex, beating him to a bloody pulp. She takes the bag back and brings it back to her lover, apologizing for what's happened. In the middle of the night, everything turns upside down. Duchesne receives a call from Ruben, who drops off Noah and hurries out, telling him to talk to his sister. More subplots come into play this episode, as Jamie is en route to Spain, but with a big decision to make. Will he decide to team up with Lizzie or not? Meanwhile, Sully is back in the game, at least a little anyway, as he goes off searching for Rashon after some drama involving Pebbles. This whole subplot feels a little redundant, if I'm honest, not adding very much to the show. Then again, it could feed into a larger plot over time, so we'll have to wait and see for now. However, the situation involving Duchesne and the redevelopment of Summer House is the big drama here, and that's just starting to become a bigger deal than it currently is, especially with the situation in Spain resting so precariously on a knife edge. Episode 4 of Top Boy Season 2 begins with Ruben behind bars. The vehicles the police have been stopping all have been registered to his name, and for the last 6 months, they've been collecting evidence. But not against him. In fact, they want to use Ruben to get to Duchesne, as he's the one they're interested in taking down. Jeffrey arrives in the morning to see Duchesne, but he's got a problem. The redevelopment is being halted right now, thanks to several residents refusing to leave. One of those happens to be Duchesne's mother. The old school method used to be breaking legs, but that's obviously not an option in 2022, and certainly not against Duchesne's mum. So Duchesne decides to head down and deal with this personally. His mum gives a scathing assessment of what's currently happening with his son, eventually admitting with disgust that her water has been cut off completely. Sully shows up to see Shelley at her nail salon, wanting to try and get Mandy a job to get her life back on track. Shelley agrees to take her on, but she's haunted by Beverly, forced to hand over funds and succumb to her will. In Tangier, Morocco, Jamie touches down and is driven into the heart of town by Mauner. There, he meets Josh, the guy we saw earlier in the season who had Duchesne down on his knees. He promises to deal with this drug situation and figure out if anyone in the organization is rat and feeding information to the feds. Jamie is a smart guy though, smarter than Duchesne it seems. It turns out Mauner is actually the one in charge, hiding behind the facade of Josh. It's clever, and they're quick to point that out to him. They also mention how the rat is definitely on the Moroccan side. But who could it be? Down on the beach, Jamie meets a young hustler who happens to be living there, with nowhere to go. This boy wants to get to Spain to see his sister, but while Jamie isn't able to help, he does spend some time with him, playing football to pass the time. Sully continues to work with Pebbles, heading off to see Cypress, the man who's responsible for the drugs she stole. When Sully arrives at their gym, they point out Pebbles is the one in the wrong here. Sully claims it was a mistake, but when they start talking compensation, Sully pulls a gun and stops this in its tracks. However, he does promise to settle this in the morning. Speaking of settling, down in Morocco, things take another bad turn when the police show up on the shore again and intercept another package. Only this time it's a dud. With the feds waiting for them, Josh turns the gun on his own bodyguard, Credo, realizing he's the one responsible. Shooting him in cold blood, it seems they've stopped the leak. In the middle of the night, Sully awakens to hear Pebbles calling out for help. It's Cypress's boys. They search his barge while holding him up at gunpoint, but the drugs aren't there. It turns out Pebbles has sold Sully out, trying to resolve this situation on her own. Unfortunately, Sully is beaten down to a pulp and dragged off with. There are various different storylines going on this year, and the result is a second season that feels quite sporadic and frantic with a lot going on. The Sully situation appears to be a way to get him playing ball with Duchesne, while Shelley's past is coming back to haunt her too, which could tie into a larger storyline further on down the line. The Duchesne situation and what's happening in Spain and Morocco is far more interesting though, and it does appear that they've found the leak now. Whether there's more to this than that though remains to be seen. One thing's for sure, this conflict is far from over, and as we cross the halfway point of this season, everything is left wide open for where it may go next. Episode 5 of Top Boy Season 2 starts with a video of Sully doing the rounds, with him being beaten down by Cypress and his boys. Everyone at Summer House ends up seeing this, meaning there could be serious ramifications coming their way. Jack is one of those who sees the video, and she hurriedly heads over to Duchesne's place to let him know. In Morocco, Jamie feeds back to Duchesne that the situation has been dealt with, and he'll be heading home soon. Duchesne wants him back, urging him to head out on the road for his next job. However, speaking to Josh sees Jamie's conviction waver as he rings Lizzie and decides to work together with her. Emilio drives Jamie up to see Juan, warning this could be bad. While at the petrol station, Jamie phones Duchesne and lets him know he's meeting Juan, spinning this as a lucrative deal for them both, and making sure no more shipments are intercepted or stolen, increasing both their profits. Meanwhile, Lauren finds herself in a tough situation when V takes her phone away. Curtis takes V's side over Lauren's, claiming she doesn't need it and that social media and 5 grams aren't good for the baby. Lauren is shocked, but when Curtis turns hostile, she backs down, not wanting a big confrontation. She does manage to convince him to drive her out to the department store, needing new maternity clothes. Unfortunately, when they get there, Curtis decides to send V in until Lauren starts bursting into tears. Finally left alone, Lauren decides to make a run for it, charging out of the fire exit and hurrying down to escape Curtis and V. It doesn't take long for the others to figure out what's happening, but she manages to get in a taxi and escape Curtis just as he shows up and begins pounding on the glass. It's certainly touch and go for a while though during this nail-biting segment. On the hunt for Sully, Jack and the boys show up at the barge and find Peggy in the woods. Speaking to her, she brings up Cypress's name, which in turn sees Duchesne ringing and promising to lay him out if he doesn't give Sully back. However, Cypress wants his gear and everything is left hanging in the balance. Meanwhile, Jamie meets Juan, who promises to crush him and Duchesne if he tries moving product on his turf. Jamie suggests they cut out hostility and just focus on business. Juan wants 25% of the profits and a €100,000 down payment too. In exchange, Duchesne and Jamie will get free movement and protection. Getting nowhere, Jamie angles a separate business proposition, pointing out that he could go into business and cut out Duchesne completely. In doing so, this would allow the Dukes to come into play, with Juan claiming they can bring in up to 10 times more product. It's a dangerous game and one that'll be interesting to see whether Duchesne or Jamie comes out of on top. Back in London, Jack figures out where Sully is being kept and breaks into an abandoned shop after hours. Several people are shot dead, while Sully is found beaten but still alive, held up in the storage cupboard. In order to hide the evidence, Duchesne orders Kieran to grab some petrol cans and flaming the place out, hiding evidence that they were even there. As the group scramble out and head home, Jamie messages Duchesne with the deal he's been given, while Jack cleans herself up. Only, a knock at the door sees a teary Lauren arrive, needing a place to stay. Lauren finally manages to escape the horrors of V and Curtis, with her scenes incredibly moving and racked in tension right the way through. The hug she gives Jack at the end is really moving, and it's a pretty powerful moment too, one that could end up having repercussions in the future should Curtis try to find her and track his partner down. Meanwhile, Sully is found in the abandoned shop with the shootout at the end, a nice way to pepper in some action in what's otherwise been a rather subdued season, with not much in the way of outright action of thriller elements. However, the drama across in Spain and Morocco is certainly intriguing, and seeing Jamie potentially getting the one-up over Duchesne, undermining his business and deciding to try and play his hand brings up a nice power dynamic that'll be interesting to see play out. Episode 6 of Top Boy Season 2 begins with Jack grabbing a girl called Keziah and bundling her in the back of her car. She's involved in At's murder, given she's the girl from the surveillance footage. She claims not to be involved, as Jack promises to kill the guy who killed At's. In exchange, she'll be able to leave. So naturally, she spills the beans. The guy's name is Dexter, and he's currently held out in a place called Beau. When Duchesne finds out, he decides to deal with this himself personally. In Spain, Jamie is surprised to find Sully show up. He's there to straighten things out with Juan and to keep an eye on Jamie too, promising to bury him if things go sideways. So Sully meets with Juan, agreeing to his original terms. However, Sully wants shipments to come in every week, but it would also mean some of these will need to be seized to keep things ticking over. Sully also has the down payment he asked for too, but makes a bold choice to send a message to everyone else. She shoots Juan and his men in cold blood. Sully also claims to know what Jamie has been up to as well, scoffing at Juan mentioning big plans. Back in London, Lauren happens to be crashing at Beck's place, but she's not exactly happy about it. Curtis rings Jack from Lauren's phone, but Jack plays the part well, claiming she doesn't know where her sister is. It seems to work too, but V isn't convinced. She calls Lauren scum, going on to mention how she has gangster friends, and it's not worth pursuing her anymore. Curtis though is dead set on bringing her back. Meanwhile, Duchesne's mum has moved out, but Pat comes flying in with big news. It turns out they've changed the social housing provision. It originally stated 29%, but it's actually closer to 5%. As they all bemoan what this means, one person who's not here is Duchesne. Duchesne happens to be in court, watching as Reuben Miller tries to appeal bail to the Crown Court. With serious charges against him, they refuse bail. Sarah, the officer in charge, stands up and mentions how the police are intensifying their search for Duchesne right now. Duchesne leaves when he hears this, realizing this isn't the last he'll hear from the police, and concerned with Reuben could end up snitching. Back around Summerhouse, Shelley is confronted by Beverly, who demands she hand over $20,000 to shut her up completely. So what has Bev got against Shelley? Well, it turns out Shelley's ex hit Ryan, who has ties with Bev. On the way down from the hit, he smashed his head on the corner of the table, blood everywhere. Shelley wanted to call an ambulance, but her ex refused. Ryan was buried, but as Bev was there too, Shelley's DNA happened to be all over the body, so Bev has been using this as a bargaining chip to blackmail her. Remember Dexter? Well, it turns out he happens to have ties with Kit, who runs in Jamie's gang. Kit was the one who encouraged Dexter to scare Ats, but it all escalated from there when he ended up shanking Ats. As Dexter tries to leave, Duchesne shows up outside with his boys. With little other choice but to save his own life, Kit smashes Dexter's head in and kills the guy, intending to cover his own tracks. With gunshots echoing in the air, everyone leaves, but Duchesne remains wary and suspicious of Kit's. There is so much going on this season, with little subplots cropping up all over the place. Of course, this feeds into the larger life of those in Summerhouse, serving as a slice of life drama to depict the criminal underworld of London. The glue that holds all of this together is, of course, the drama in Spain and London with Duchesne's operation. Seeing Sully now back on terms with Duchesne is a surprise, as is him showing up in Spain. Unfortunately for Jamie, it also means Sully has caught wind of their business plans, and it appears he's onto him now. With 2-hour-long episodes left, Top Boy leaves everything wide open, as this season looks to really ramp up the tension now. Episode 7 of Top Boy Season 2 begins with Curtis and V heading down to London, intent on finding Lauren. She's still at Beck's place, with Jack continuing to try and hide her sister no matter what. Curtis and V begin searching for Lauren. After breaking into her place and looking around, they find nothing and leave. However, you can sense they're just getting started. Meanwhile, Sully is back in London, and he joins Duchesne, informing him that Spain has been dealt with, and shipments will be coming in soon. He also warns that Jamie appears to have been scheming behind his back. After Shelley's confession last episode, she heads out into the woods, where she buried the body. Digging it up, she manages to work to cover this up completely, using Mandy's contacts to get rid of the body forever. While they work to get rid of the evidence, Curtis and V arrive at Shelley's nail salon looking for Lauren. There's only Naomi there, and she doesn't know anything about Lauren. Word of this does reach Jack though, who realizes that everything is closing in on her. She has no choice but to tell Duchesne. Jamie though has problems of his own, coming to blows with Aaron, and then being confronted by Duchesne at his apartment. He believes Jamie is responsible for killing Ats, doing so to send a message and step up to become boss. According to Duchesne, Jamie had Kit kill Dexter to cover everything up. Jamie swears this isn't right, but in order to prove his loyalty, he now needs to turn on his own brothers. Jamie heads over to Kit's place, where Kit admits to what's happened. Jamie is shocked, realizing they're both screwed, especially when Duchesne finds out. Having heard about Lauren, Duchesne arrives in the diner, where Curtis happens to be waiting for him. The pair have a tense conversation, with Duchesne eventually telling Curtis there's no chance of him getting Lauren back. However, Curtis and V decide to keep tailing Duchesne's boys after they leave, determined to disrupt his business and send a proper message. V and Curtis follow two of the guys, Samsey and Bratters, holding them up at gunpoint. Curtis steals a bag full of money and decides to set up a trade, Duchesne's money and drugs for Lauren. Meanwhile, Ruben meets detectives Lee and Sarah, trying to strike a deal with them. He brings up Bobby Rakes, the guy Duchesne and Sully both killed way back in Season 1, as additional information. In exchange, though, he wants a lot of assurances. It appears Ruben is close to snitching, but whether he'll go through with this or not remains to be seen. As the episode closes out, everything comes crumbling down around Duchesne. Curtis threatens Duchesne with an unnerving video call. Wilson, Ruben's lawyer, rings and claims he's been fired, while Duchesne receives word that his mum has passed away. It's a shame that the best episode of the season comes right at the end. With the situation in Spain seemingly resolved now, the attention turns closer to home as we see the situation involving Lauren and Curtis reach fever pitch. Seeing how this ties into Duchesne and his operation is something that promises a massive finale that could have huge consequences for all involved. Personally, though, I wish they just had this storyline as the central focus this year, bubbling up a gang war between those in Liverpool and those down in London. The season has still been enjoyable and delivers some excellent drama here, leaving the door wide open for the finale too. You have to open a finale with a bang, and prove yourself takes that mandate very literally, as Curtis and V, armed with those grease guns, run into Shelley's nail bar and shoot the place to bits. It's a clear message, and it'll be received pretty clear. As if Duchesne and Sully didn't have enough problems. Episode 8 recap. One of those problems is Ruben, who you'll recall decided to snitch in the previous episode. Naturally, Duchesne and Sully conspire to have him murdered in prison by a lifer on his wing. Jamie also arrives in the cafe to report what Kit said, wanting to prove he's loyal in the aftermath of this obvious betrayal. Predictably, Duchesne instructs him to kill Kit, and if he doesn't, Duchesne will kill him, or, more likely, get Sully to do it. Knowing what we know about Jamie, it's really no surprise that he tells Kit straight away and tells him they both need to get out of London ASAP. Jamie springs this on Aaron and Steph at their dad's grave on his birthday, which isn't exactly the right time. Neither of the brothers is having it, neither wants any part in his affairs. Jamie's conflict has always been that the manner in which he provides is also just as likely to endanger his family as it is to protect them, and here we see the consequences of that. Family is obviously important to Curtis too, since he's determined to get Lauren back. Jack calls him to arrange a meeting, claiming she'll exchange Lauren for the stolen drugs and money, but it's obviously a setup, so Curtis comes up with another plan. He's going to snatch Jack and exchange her for Lauren. The wait for all of this is agonizing, with Jack out in the open and everyone else in cars nearby. But the scene takes a swerve when Lauren herself calls Curtis. She tips him off that he's being set up and tells him she wants to come home. She'll only meet him, though, if he comes alone, and given Curtis is so unwilling to entertain the idea that Lauren doesn't actually love him, he falls for this obvious ruse. He goes to meet Lauren alone, and when she gets the opportunity, she stabs him to death. Lauren has been nothing but trouble all throughout Top Boy, but she sells the hell of outer distress in this scene. By the time Duchesne and Sully arrive to clean up the mess, it's almost as much of a relief for the audience as it is for her. V and Speaks leave London in the end. After calling Curtis's phone, they're told by Sully that they have two options: they can either stay and be killed, or they can leave. Either way, Curtis won't be going with them. It's a no-brainer, really. In a bit of a random deviation that is just a bit too contrived for this show's usual standards, Tia finds a gun in a playground that she and Steph try to sell to some local goons who get a bit leery during the sale. Steph pulls the gun on them and flees, so they give chase, and Steph is forced to call Jamie for help. Of course, Jamie arrives in the nick of time, and for once Steph is glad to see him. Reminded of how much he cares for his brothers, Jamie realizes, internally, though it's made obvious by what comes next, that he can't put them through the stress of hiding out in Wales while London's most notorious criminals hunt them down. So, he kills Kit, as Duchesne told him. Season 2 ending explained, with most of the big drama having been handled, Prove Yourself begins to work through some concluding scenes to build a satisfying ending. Pebbles, feeling bad about what happened with Sully, fixes him some regular visitation with Tash. Duchesne goes to visit Ruben in prison and threatens to kill his family. If he snitches, understandably, he decides not to snitch. Then Duchesne goes to visit Jeffrey, and obviously on a roll at this point, threatens to kill Lizzie if he doesn't guarantee that the summer house redevelopment provides enough housing for all the displaced occupants to return there if they want to. The development plans are subsequently cancelled. That might be problematic for Duchesne's retirement plans, but we also see Mauner overseeing a huge shipment and see the operation continuing apace in London, with Jamie and Jack as the top lieutenants, so he's not going to be short of money in the short term, and that kid in Morocco uses Jamie's watch to secure passage to Spain. But despite all the progress made in Duchesne and Sully's relationship this season, they still have fundamental differences, and their way of doing things won't align. They discuss this in a candid chat on Duchesne's balcony, and while their conversation is amicable, it's obvious that there's truth to it. It's even more obvious when Sully goes to Jamie's home and shoots him twice in the chest and once in the head, right in front of Aaron and Steph. This final development is just about the only aspect of this finale I'm not sure about, and I think it'll be massively contentious for the show's fans. Sully, who has always been the show's most complex and sympathetic character, has killed off the show's second most complex, though not necessarily sympathetic character. And he might have done so for no better reason than he wanted to. Of course, we know Jamie tried to betray him and Duchesne earlier in the season. But we also know that Jamie proved his loyalty by killing his best friend. So, while it's a possibility that Duchesne ordered his death, it seems unlikely, especially on the back of that whole alignment conversation on the balcony. Instead, it simply seems like Sully couldn't let his mistrust of Jamie go, and that spells dark things for the future of his character in subsequent seasons. Then again, in Top Boy, dark things are pretty much the only kind. You can stream Netflix's Top Boy Season 2, Prove Yourself, exclusively on Netflix. Do you have any thoughts on Netflix's Top Boy Season 2's ending? Let us know in the comments box.